Thank you all for coming. My name's Joanna Plumpton, and I'm actually just going to start it off with a little bit of a temperature reading on these two topics here. Are you familiar with like a clapometer? So what you do is, I'm going to say the phrase, and if it's something that really resonates positively for you, I want you to give it like a big chap, a big clear. If it doesn't resonate positively for you, you can either be quiet or give it a little boo or hiss. So my first term is Agile coaching. Okay, all right, thank you very much. And then my second term is governance. Wow, this is so. I've already got an audience here that has seems to have come to terms with the personal conflict that I've had between these two here. So excellent. All right. So let me just give you a bit of a background to my context. So I work for a global technology services firm called Tech Systems. We've got offices around the globe, and while we'll have couple of thousand engagements going at any one time, we'll typically have about 200 application modernization teams running at any one point in time. And so with that, although we've actually got a really good NPS score that's in the 90s, we still have client escalations. And what would be happening with those is these client escalations would happen, and it would be an unhappy place. And so for me, it was a case of you're asked to come in, help with the cleanup. This was not a place where I wanted to be. And the other problem with this kind of a situation is you need to be invited in as a coach. And often in these situations, I was forced upon the team. So as much as you're trying to help, it's not super great. So what I really wanted to have happen is understand why is it everything would look like it was all green on the outside, but what's actually happening, bam, bad surprise. These escalations come out of nowhere. So we're asking ourselves, what would it take to have successful engagements and to not be surprised? So my boss at the time, he had this idea of, let's just track, how often are we surprised? So this is like our surpriseometer here. So you can kind of see, we're just bad surprises happening far too often. So what would it take for us to actually not have any surprises and to be able to actually identify when things are starting to go in the wrong direction and be there and supporting the teams before it becomes a bad surprise out of nowhere? But let's go back to a bit of a definition of governance. So if it's the way in which an organization is managed and at the highest level and the systems for doing this, and then we've also got in there around how it's including all the practices and processes and how it's also trying to produce meaningful value for its customers. So I think you can see here there's some synergies between what governance is and how, as an Agile coach, you can help with these things around, we talk about practices and processes and producing meaningful value. You can see there's some definite synergies, but I was really struggling with that. Because when I was typically asking around governance or my personal experience of it, I often have, hear these types of words like, it's a necessary evil, it's documentation, it's onerous. So that was where I was really coming into conflict and between the two. And then, of course, we're all going to be familiar with those Agile coaches that despite the best intentions, despite the best will in the world, they've come across and have become the Agile auditor. So what would it take for the leadership team, including me, to be more proactive in monitoring our engagements and assessing the risk on an ongoing basis? That's where there was this idea of practice partner. we really only had like maybe 1 or 2 official Agile coaches, but at the end of the day, we were actually already doing a lot of coaching with the people, but that was just, there wasn't any real rhyme or reason to where people went and how we were just there as a service to people, really. So this idea of practice partner was to be much more intentional about it, and the idea was to very much foster a relationship with a small group of the engagements, and really just you're doing a lot of the things that you would be doing anyway, but helping people understand how to use some of the things that they're seeing. It's like you're bringing your own experience to bear and trying to actually have a good relationship with the teams that are there. So we've a few different ways of approaching this, as you can see here. But what I noticed for me personally is that I seem to be kind of coaching for the same kinds of things over and over again, and it felt like I was doing a lot of helping set up with the teams the same kinds of things over and over again, despite having different contexts of teams. So I talk about the different contexts of the teams. So for us, because we've got many different clients, many different tech stacks, totally different products, different ALM tools like Jira, Azure DevOps, you name it, it's out there. SonarQube, whatever else is we're using. So we've got lots of different things that we're situations that we find ourselves in. So the challenge is of course, when you've got all of these different situations, it becomes quite difficult to have a way of being able to have access to, well, what things are you tracking on your engagement? And so, because we don't have everything's different, everything's all over the place. We're finding it really difficult to actually self-serve, trying to have some information about the different engagements that we were supporting. And so it's really what we were doing there. We were always kind of like trying to dig deeper to find things, because I wanted to be able to self-serve some of this information, because it means that when you are actually having a conversation with the teams that you're working with, you can make it much more relevant and to the point. And you can also help the teams help for themselves. So there's a lot of just working with them. So I would say the other challenge with this, of course, is that we were really doing this. It is on the side. It's a side job. But there's always a limit of time, so that things that we can have as a practice partner to be able to do this quicker was going to be useful. So with that, we were noticing that there was a couple of really good inspirations, I would say, for what we were using with teams as practice partners. The first one comes from Troy McGuinness, and I'm sure he's been inspired by other people behind him, but I really like Troy's diagram here, what it's looking at, it's taking these 6 different business outcome areas, and he suggests, just get started simply. Find one kind of an indicator in each area to get started, and this will balance it out. So don't focus too much on one versus another. Try to get something and pull it and see how it goes. The other inspiration that we were using with our teams on a regular basis were many of the concepts from that well-known book, Accelerate. So I'd say 2 big inspirations for what we were trying to do here. So this really led for us, because we never know, we don't have access to our customer tools a lot of the time as the practice partner, and we can't just have one way of accessing these things, because, like I say, we're on lots of different tools, lots of different customers. So what this ended up being was we ended up with lots of different various Excel templates, trying to offer things to our teams to get them started quickly. And it was also a case of using them with some training sessions, some workshops, but trying to kind of just share a lot of what's working well in one team versus another, a lot of sharing the learnings. So those were really the things that we were doing to actually help with not having these bad surprises, trying to encourage these good things to happen. So this is all quite time-consuming, though, when you've got such a wide context. And so we had this vision, which was, so this is like an early version of the vision, because we really weren't aware of any existing solutions out of the box to the challenge that we have, which, because I think there's some really great tooling out there to help when you're in one organization or a group of, so you're all in the same environment together, but when you're on lots of different environments, what we really wanted to have as practice partners was something that would allow the equivalent of what our teams were doing in their customer tools to get that data internally to help us help our teams. So we did actually, and we got going on this, but I will say we did actually have a couple of false starts on this. And what I mean by that, it made me think of Paul's talk a little earlier today, where he talks about having you can get started and sometimes you'll quit. Well, it actually meant that when we did get started, we had actually got the beginnings of something here. And it was kind of like, I was trying to understand, well, why did this never go anywhere? Because people kept on talking about these things that we were trying, and yet we never actually really tried to get them used with people. And my takeaway from these false starts is that we were really doing these as side-of-desk projects, and by having these as side-of-desk projects, we weren't following through. We weren't actually following through on these experiments. We weren't actually trying to engage with our users and find out, hey, is this useful or not? Or are we imposing like this because of what for the teams themselves is, unfortunately, I think it is a little bit it is some extra overhead, because the fact is we're trying to get them to they're typically doing it within their clients already. But so we've got our vision, we have an idea of what we do, and we've had a couple of false starts, but they've got us off on a pretty good foot. We've got something to leverage already internally. So this time, this is where I kind of got much more involved, and I was just like, okay, how are we going to make this not a side-of-desk project in the company that I work at? And I was really keen to, let's try putting into practice some of, as Agile coaches, we're always saying, like, we really should be having lean business cases and trying to put this into action. Well, trying to actually use for ourselves what we encourage our customers to try and see if it will work for them. So this is like a portion of the lean business case. And I also thought for you might actually like to see, I'm not saying this is good, bad, or ugly. This is a real example of what we were using. Feedback, very welcome. So we've got a few things that we believe will happen by building out this product and getting people to use it. And then the leading indicators, that gave us a few things that would be early signs to see, is it going in the right direction? So we did actually very quickly get to an MVP because of those earlier starts that we'd had. And we had in that MVP really focused in on one particular context of our engagements, of those 200 odd engagements that we've got going at any one time, which really is sprint-based application development projects, I would say, for the most part. And we did get going very small, and you can actually see we did do a small team pilot, and I think we got some good signs that this is worth continuing. The other thing that one of those teams is so we've called it Sentinel, and the Sentinel team was using Sentinel on ourselves. So I think that was really powerful for getting people to really connect with the product. And again, that's something that Powell was talking a little bit earlier today around, are you a product-centric development team, or one that's just building stuff? So that's really where we were getting started. So maybe a bit more than an MVP, but as you were saying, but this is what the dashboard looks like, and it's not too much dissimilar from today. And I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we have on here at the moment. So I think the first thing is really tried to keep the data entry very simple. We've got some basic, at the top you've got two bits. You've got the sprint data, and then we've got some release data. Those were the kind of the two pieces of data entry there. Then we've got the 6 different outcome areas. So as you saw earlier from the Troy McGuinness inspiration, we've got 1 card per business outcome, and then within each card, we've asked ourselves, well, what would be good signs that things are going well in that area, or would be good indicators for, are we providing value? Do we have predictability, etc. Now, the other thing that I think is worth calling out on here, bit controversial, grading. At the top, we have an overall grade, and then for each of the outcome areas, we've also got a grade. So the way that that's put together, it's taking, basically you take all of the KPIs in one area, and it's got a weighted scoring for them, and then it looks at, well, what is the actual result in that particular area. I'll come back to that. So, you've seen what the dashboard looks like and how we put it together. So I thought I would share some of the lessons that we've learned through going through this so far, as we've been bringing on a few more teams to test this out with us. So one, I think there's actually some things that we have been doing right, and I think we need to keep doing. One, I think, is that underlying partnership and curiosity with the teams. That was number one. So what that really meant was using this with the teams such that when you see something that maybe looks a little interesting, don't go jump all over somebody, go, oh my God, what the hell, is that all red? It's on fire. No, go and be like, hey, be open, be curious. That looks interesting to me. Tell me a bit more around what's going on. So that has been an underlying principle. So for everybody that gets onboarded onto using this, it's you don't get access unless you recognize how important it is to use it that way. But let's go on to the getting it wrong side of things. So this is where, when I say not thinking end-to-end to enable better adoption, because I noticed we were actually finding it quite difficult to get users using it, and because it is a bit of an overhead for them, and when it is an MVP and it's not providing a huge amount of value to the individual teams of the immediate use of it. So, and I focused a lot of effort on the teams themselves, but I had done that to the detriment of ignoring actually what I would say was our users with the real driving need for this, which was our practice partners, which are basically our governance teams supporting them. And I ignored the practice partners in favor of focusing on the teams. So mistake number one. Number two, I think I mentioned it already, but I really did want this to be about inviting participation and requesting commitment for a test period of time, because when you start tracking KPIs or asking teams to do that, if you've just got, say, one reporting period, one sprint's worth of data, it's not going to be that useful. So what you really wanted to, I really was trying to encourage is like, let's kind of just get you to stick with it for a few sprints, a set number of sprints, like really, and then we'll be in a better place to have feedback and reevaluate. So that has actually been working for us. Now, back to that grading. I underestimated the effects of the fear. People could see the grades there, and they were getting, I'll touch on this later, but we were finding that people really weren't comfortable with seeing the grades, even if nobody was coming and screaming at them, berating them about it. Although there was absolutely nothing around that, I had underestimated quite how ingrained, almost like a lack of psychological safety that we had. So what I have actually done is we have actually removed the grading. And what I do want to do, though, is actually come back and have some kind of a risk assessment there. I think there's a good idea, but we've got to do a lot more playing with that, and we're not in a place to add that back in. But I think the fact that we've got the actual widgets there, the metrics there, that we practice partners can use with the team is actually it actually forces us to really look at it. The other piece is acknowledging context and encouraging challenges to what they're seeing. So I've always recognized that this was a kind of a subset of all of the different kinds of application modernization engagements that we have. And it's like, well, what would it take to get this working in your context? So although I actually have got some of the teams using it that I know are not in this context, because I want them to challenge and I want to understand what would we need for it to actually work in their context. And it's also, what I'm also finding is that actually their context isn't that different. And a lot of what we've got here, you don't actually need to change. So if everybody likes to think they're very special and different, but the conclusion I'm coming to is actually we're probably not going to need too many tweaks to it for a few different things there. And I do want to encourage people to challenge this. Final getting it wrong one is our approach to watermelons and fake wolf cries. So with the boy cries wolf scenario, this was kind of an interesting one because what's happened here is we've got dashboards that were saying F, red, there's just red all over the board. And I was like, oh, why is that happening? I've got the team that's saying, like, customer is happy, everything's great, the team's complaining, I'm getting an F, it's red. And what it was about was it was actually, I actually think it's right in some ways, but they were not putting their releases in. And the reason they weren't putting their releases in is because they weren't actually having any UAT or production releases. I was just like, okay, curious. So there's two aspects to this. One, I needed to make sure that, or will need to make sure that this doesn't cause us to get colorblind to this. I don't want to just keep seeing red and to start ignoring it, such that when something really is red, you're going to miss it. But the reason I think this is a particularly interesting case is because at the end of the day, guess what? This customer may have been super happy with this team, but they ran into large financial difficulties and actually had to cancel this team. So I would actually say it was a pretty good indicator. Maybe it's showing up in a different way, but it could actually cause us to go much deeper into what's going on there. On the watermelon side, there's one where we had people weren't using sprint goals, and their way of handling that was just like, oh, we'll leave that empty, but say we met it. I was just like, hang on a sec. So that has the potential for something, well, therefore something was showing up very green because it's always being met, but at the end of the day, they're not actually having any goals to meet. So what's next? I do want to get more practice partners, get more people familiar with using this and being able to use it and take on responsibility for helping other teams, because I think that's a great way of I say, sharing the governance load and the burdens load, and also doing a lot of sharing and teaching around it. It's also going to mean we get more users, which means more feedback that will help us see are we going in the right direction. Now with this, I don't actually have any current plans to make this mandatory. And I think there's an interesting thing that keeps coming up around of like, we should just force everybody to start using this tool. I feel a bit mixed about that one. I actually really like the approach right now, and I believe that if we continue down this route, it's almost just become ingrained into, people will be asking for it, hey, where's my instance of this? I need to get access. So I'm just kind of hoping that organically, it just becomes our way of working. I do actually want to be able to leverage it for different team contexts. I do want to get a few different pieces in there around what things would we be looking at for, say, a cloud migration project versus just an application development one on a greenfield. And I think there are some nuances between greenfield and brownfield engagements as well. And another thing I'm wondering about is looking at the team longevity, because depending on, I say, where you are in that whole forming, storming, norming, performing, I think that has impact on this as well. So ideas for the future. I think we need to do more around trending versus outliers. You may have not noticed it because it's this tiny little spark trend line indicator, but we've got a little bit there, but we need to do more on that. And the other thing for me that's really massively missing right now, and I know 55 Degreed is here, so I'm hoping I'll get some ideas there on this, but is flow metrics. I don't really have enough in here around flow metrics and how we can use that. And of course, there's that. You saw the contentious grading, and I am wondering, like, how can we bring back some kind of a risk assessment factor? Because, of course, one of the things we want to be able to do is to quickly see, when we've only got limited time, where should we maybe be going and having conversations first. It's just about trying to prioritization of our time. And I may be getting ahead of myself here, but we were actually looking at AI. So is AI ready to support coaching and governance? I think I'm seeing some initial interesting results from just playing around myself. Love to hear what your thoughts are. And then, of course, one of the things I really want to be able to do is enable teams to have a minimal kind of context for their situation, but allow them to basically decide for themselves what are the things that would they want to track for sustainability, productivity, value, etc. Let them self-select into those areas, but not there yet. So if I bring it back to where we started, we had that surpriseometer. So I would say anecdotally, we're not seeing quite the level of bad surprises that we have in the past, but I don't have any real data around this. But when I was preparing for this, I was wondering, what else are organisations doing around surprises? Is anybody else doing this? And I came across Mark Britt's that talks about the goal of being an unsurprisable organisation. So he describes it as an agile, responsive, connected workforce. It greatly reduces the ability for surprises to happen. But then how do you make that happen? It's around working out loud. And I really love this concept. It really resonated well for me. You've got this, it's that observable work plus narrating your work. And I found one of the things I was always doing there was like talking about making work visible. So it's just a thread for me to pull on right now, but I'm really interested to learn more about this. There's somebody else that's even done some research, like PhD research, onto how do you even measure working out loud in your organisation. So interesting stuff for me to go on next. Maybe I'll do a talk on working out loud next time. So to wrap up, well, many of us have had negative experiences with governance. My most recent experience has made me change my tune. I'm actually getting much happier with that positive symbiosis between coaching and governance and how they actually can work well and support each other. And if the experts on corporate governance can talk about what the intent there, and how it's about adapting in a constantly changing environment, and all these other good things, I think you'll notice that they really resonate from a lean agile perspective. And so I'd actually say that as people in the lean agile community, we should be demanding good governance and helping our organizations set that up and do that in a really healthy manner. I've got a few sources that if you're interested to learn more on any of the things that I've covered today. And then finally, it's really to say thank you very much for coming to... Oh, yeah, sure. I say there, thank you very much for coming and just hearing about my experience, my story with coaching and governance so far. You'll also see, I'm just doing a mini plug there for Tech She Can. So Tech She Can, it's a charity working with schools and to really encourage young people to go and take a career in the technology sector. So if you'd like to know more about this, come and find me afterwards. But I'm a Tech She Can champion, and I'd love to get some more Tech She Can champions as well. So that's it. Thank you.